Black Lives Matter movement were a super important method of communication in both the values that the Black Lives Movement communicated and also the way that the various subgroups of the society responded to the Black Lives Matter movement. So, first, I'm going to talk about a few things in the paper briefly, and then I'll talk about how they were connected to the memes that I found. So, the first thing that I found interesting in the paper was that it says, in a few years, the meme of Black Lives Matter has been taken up in the US society, especially with people that were most historically concerned with the issues of racial inequality and injustice. So, what this is saying is that even people who really believe in these issues were using memes to communicate them. So, it wasn't entirely just a way to like write off or make fun of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was actually a pivotal part of the movement and its communication. Another thing that the paper says is this: although social sciences such as sociology and political science have often historically been a way to study protests and why it happens and how people are talking about it, what people fail to take into consideration is the science of communication and psychology. So, how something is being communicated in light of the people that are both communicating it and receiving it. Um, so, that is basically saying, memes were a very important way of communication for the past like 10 years, and this movement was a movement that very much highlighted that. So, the last thing that I think is important that the paper discusses in light of what I'm going to talk about with the memes is how they talk about this theory that they have called the dynamic dual pathway model. So this is a theory that basically explains why memes became so useful in communicating with each other about this movement when we weren't able to actually go out and talk to each other as much as we could have before the pandemic. So essentially, it's saying that if a person sees another person victimized, that they feel could also be like they could also be a victim. So if they share some certain experiences of the victim, they're automatically going to be more inclined to support the victim, even if they don't know them person to person. So, when memes and history are being communicated, like the news on social media, through this use of like strong pictures and emotional images, it's a really effective way to get across things that people might otherwise just overlook. Um, so, an example of this is this meme right here. So, it says, just this first one, not the third box. It says, "Is your house on fire?" Oh, wait. Trying to find. There we go. It says, "Is your house on fire?" No, but like it still matters. So, three elements of this meme stand out to me the most. The first one is it's like it's meant to be depicted as a white lady talking to another white lady. The second is the wording is like stereotypically the way that white people talk to white women can be known to talk to one another. And the third thing is that one has a fire in the background and the other house doesn't. So these three images kind of these three aspects of the image lead us to lead us to draw conclusions that the meme is saying. Essentially, one lady's like, well, just because my house is a house too, like, isn't it important? So what they're trying to communicate by this is, in the Black Lives Matter movement, people were paying a lot of attention to Black people and their views, but white people and other minorities were getting upset that, like, hey, what about our experiences? Don't they matter? So this meme essentially is saying, like, just because your house is important doesn't mean that it has to be focused on 100% of the time, because the need is on the house, quote unquote, that has the fire. So they use this to communicate that, just because black people, um, they're not necessarily better or worse than white people, it's just they had a need that needed to be addressed in that moment. Can't they just be allowed to, have their need looked at? So you would have to understand the whole context of not only the Black Lives Matter movement, but how people were contrasting that with the All Lives Matter movement. So, it's interesting because the meme kind of has both of those aspects to it, but it also is like kind of for white people, and at least that's what you can illustrate. So, all these different like sub aspects of our culture are depicted simply by looking at just these two pictures, which I think is fascinating. Another meme that I found that was really powerful to me was, if I can find it, it says, oops, it says, here it is. It says, if all lives mattered, we wouldn't have to say Black Lives Mattered. That's it. Just a picture of a guy looking very passionate and driven about what he's saying and those words. Um, just those two things illustrate a whole discussion of people are saying, like, well, we shouldn't say Black Lives Matter. We should say everybody matters because everybody is important. That goes into what we were talking about in class about, um, you know, the underlying assumptions people have that colorblindness is better than calling out specific groups of people. It also goes back to what the other one was talking about of all lives matter. And all of it is saying that we wouldn't need to talk and advocate about all these things if we actually already had that. If it was true that all lives mattered in the sense that we feel is like should actually be the case, we wouldn't be talking as we speak. So and it's crazy because just those two things illustrate that whole tension. And it's also interesting that you would have to be part of the culture to pick that up. So, one of the things that the paper talks about that's really interesting about that aspect is a lot of people, myself included, were taking like social media and memes as actual news of the situation at hand. What's interesting for me is I was actually living not in America at the time, so but yet I still had a certain influence over Americans and over my followers and everything, my family who were thinking about the issues in their country. So I got to see it kind of from a perspective of being outside the country, but still like an American who's seen this happen over time. This conflict, I mean, between different races. So the paper talks about how people, especially under 30, are more and more inclined to subconsciously take these underlying meanings just by looking at this picture and therefore determining their entire outlook on the issue at hand. So, two things come to my mind with that. One, it shows the importance of memes and how much they can say about like the issue. And secondly, it takes into consideration the people and what their values are and how they actually care about really understanding the issue at hand. If they're just scrolling, then I mean, I don't know if they really value so much, or I don't. It might suggest that they don't value the issue and more just about like getting fast information. So there's a lot, right, that memes illustrate about like our world, especially in this context. So the last meme I want to talk about is a very racist meme. Um, it, if I can find it, it says, here it is. Yes, I'm glad I found it. It says, of course Black Lives Matter, it's just white lives matter more. So this meme, you can even see it says that it's from a site called the Almost Politically Correct Redneck. So that's kind of like, to me, it seems kind of like they're making a joke out of the situation, kind of at their own benefit, for their own benefit, at the cost of like black people. But they're also even though it's like maybe meant for more of a funny thing, to be enjoyed, it also shows the underlying beliefs that they have of black people, that they aren't as good as white people. So once again, this is like an evidence of how memes can be so important to not only understand the issue, but how people are responding to it. And even if somebody, say, I'm not saying everybody who looks like this believes this, but like maybe somebody who might have specific beliefs may come across a certain way, but they might not outrightly say anything. It still illustrates something about their culture and what they believe. And that is the importance of memes, and how necessary, why they're necessary and how much power they have over displaying and forming in somebody's mind. So our whole last year was bombarded with this. Like, there's so many different things people have said about this issue in like a variety of different ways, and honestly it was very overwhelming. But you can imagine, if you're somebody like us in our generation who didn't grow up so much like reading the actual newspaper to get news, and is increasingly more and more just using social media to understand the world around us. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense in terms of this is just how we grew to understand the way that we're supposed to understand the world. That doesn't make it right, but it does pose a very interesting societal, or a very interesting discussion on like our society and what we value and who we value and how we're communicating that. So that's, I think, the summarization of what I want to talk about today. Um, I mean, in the conclusion, there's been over time so many different ways to communicate strong political values, and I think this is one of the best ones and one of the most interesting. So, thank you for listening.